Arthur Vance felt the 10th anniversary of his wife's death like a phantom limb, an ache where a vital part of him used to be. For a decade, grief had been his most constant companion. It lived in the quiet hum of the refrigerator at night, in the empty space on the other side of the bed, and in the way he still made 2 cups of coffee every morning out of sheer, unbreakable habit. Eleanor was gone, but her ghost was a polite and tidy house guest. The world, however, was not so considerate, especially not Eleanor's family. Beatrice and Julian Croft, his mother-in-law and brother-in-law, treated the anniversary not as a day of remembrance, but as an annual performance review of his grieving. They arrived at his modest home precisely at noon, their luxury sedan whispering to a halt at the curb like a spaceship landing on a forgotten planet. Beatrice stepped out first, a woman carved from ice and disapproval. Her posture was a testament to a life lived without bending. Julian followed, a younger, sleeker version of his mother, all polished shoes and predatory smile. "Arthur," Beatrice said, her voice clipping the air. It was not a greeting, it was an assessment. "You look tired." "It's good to see you both," Arthur replied, his own voice feeling frayed and inadequate in their presence. He led them into the living room, a space filled with books and the quiet dignity of a life lived simply. To them, it was a hovel. He could see it in the way their eyes swept over the worn armchair and the faded rug. 10 years, Julian said, slumping into a chair with a sigh of theatrical boredom. Can you believe it? Time flies. For Arthur, time had crawled. Each day had been a mountain to climb, each night a valley to endure. Beatrice ran a gloved finger along a bookshelf, checking for dust. "We were just saying on the drive over, Arthur. It's time you started thinking about the future. This shrine you've built to the past isn't healthy." "It's my home," Arthur said quietly. "It's a mausoleum," Julian countered, waving a dismissive hand. "Look, I've been thinking. I have an opening in the mailroom at Croft Enterprises. It's not glamorous, but it's a start. It would get you out of this dusty old library and back into the real world." The offer hung in the air, thick with condescension. He was offering charity, a pittance to the poor, grieving widower who could never measure up. Arthur felt a familiar, hot shame rise in his chest. He was the head librarian for the city's central branch, a position he held with pride, but they always spoke of it as if he were a janitor. "Thank you, Julian, but I'm happy with my work," he managed to say. Beatrice produced an envelope from her purse. It was crisp and white. She placed it on the coffee table, pushing it toward him as if it were contaminated. "This is for you," she announced. "A little something to help you out. Perhaps you can finally get that roof fixed, or buy some furniture that wasn't made in the last century." It was a check. He didn't need to see the amount to know it would be just enough to be insulting. It was money thrown at a problem they didn't understand, a problem they saw as his failure. This was their ritual. They would come, they would judge, they would offer their cruel brand of help, and then they would leave, satisfied that they had fulfilled their familial duty. They were mourning their daughter's poor choice in a husband more than they were mourning their daughter. After they left, the silence in the house felt heavier than before. Arthur picked up the envelope. He didn't open it. He simply placed it on the mantelpiece, another monument to their disdain. A week passed. The sting of their visit began to fade, receding into the dull background ache of his life. Then another letter arrived. This one was different. It was a formal, windowed envelope from the Sterling Mutual Assurance Company. He opened it with a sense of detached curiosity. His heart stopped. It was a notification of payment. Policy number 77, B-4-C held in the name of Eleanor Vance had been claimed. The full death benefit had been disbursed. Arthur stared at the paper, his mind a sudden roaring blank. He was the sole beneficiary of that policy. He had known about it, of course, but after Eleanor's death, the paperwork had been a blur. He had assumed it lapsed, or that the premiums which she had always handled had gone unpaid. In the fog of his grief, he had never pursued it. He had never claimed it. His hands trembled as he read the letter again. The policy had been paid out to the secondary beneficiary upon the 10-year anniversary of the insured's passing, a clause he never knew existed. But who? Who was the secondary beneficiary? He called the number on the letterhead. A polite but firm customer service agent explained that due to privacy regulations, she couldn't disclose the name of the recipient. "I don't understand," Arthur said, his voice shaking. "I was her husband. I was the primary beneficiary." "Yes, sir," the agent replied patiently. "But since you never filed a claim, the policy defaulted to the contingent beneficiary after a period of 10 years. That action is now complete. Can you at least tell me anything? An address? Something?" he pleaded. There was a pause, the clicking of a keyboard. "Sir, I can't give you personal details. However, the correspondence address listed on the claim form is a corporate suite, Suite 34001450, Croft Tower in the city's financial district." The breath left Arthur's body in a single, painful rush. Croft Tower. That was the headquarters of Croft Enterprises. That was Julian's office building. The letter felt like a cold stone in his hand. For 10 years he had lived in the quiet shadow of his wife's memory. Now that shadow was stirring, revealing secrets he never knew it held. And it seemed those secrets led directly back to the family who had treated him with nothing but contempt. The past was no longer a quiet ghost. It was now an active investigation. Arthur thought back on his marriage, searching for clues he must have missed. Eleanor had been the light of his life, a brilliant and vibrant soul trapped in a gilded cage. Her family's wealth had always been a source of conflict. They wanted her to marry into money, into power. She chose Arthur, a humble history graduate with a passion for books. Their love was a quiet rebellion against the Croft dynasty's expectations. Beatrice had called their marriage a phase, and Julian had openly mocked Arthur's modest salary. "How does it feel knowing your wife's shoe budget is bigger than your annual income?" he had once sneered at a family dinner. Eleanor had always defended him fiercely. "Arthur's wealth isn't in his bank account," she would say, her eyes flashing. "It's in his heart and his mind, things you two wouldn't recognize." But the pressure had taken its toll. He remembered how she handled all their finances, a task she insisted upon. "Let me deal with the ugly numbers, my love," she would say, smiling. "You just focus on your books." He had trusted her completely, seeing her diligence as another expression of her love. Now he wondered what those ugly numbers really were. Was this insurance policy a part of some plan she had never shared? The Crofts, meanwhile, lived a life of ostentatious splendor. Croft Enterprises was a name synonymous with luxury developments. They built glass towers that scraped the sky and gated communities that walled off the world. Julian was the public face of the company, his picture frequently in the society pages, shaking hands with mayors or christening new buildings with champagne. Beatrice was the queen of the city's charity circuit, her name etched on plaques in hospital wings and museum galleries. Their entire existence was a performance of effortless superiority. They believed they were the rightful heirs to the world, and Arthur was just a piece of dirt on their polished shoes. He knew he couldn't face them alone. He needed help. He needed someone who could navigate the treacherous waters of corporate law and family secrets. He called Marcus Thorne. Marcus was an old college friend, a man who had traded his love for philosophy for a career in law. He was sharp, relentless, and possessed a healthy disdain for the arrogance of old money. Arthur explained the situation over the phone, his voice low and urgent. Marcus listened without interruption. When Arthur finished, there was a long pause. "Arthur," Marcus said, his voice suddenly serious, "this is more than just an insurance policy. This stinks to high heaven. They waited 10 years for a default clause to kick in. That's premeditated." "What can we do?" Arthur asked. "You can come to my office tomorrow morning," Marcus replied. "Bring the letter. Bring everything you have related to Eleanor's finances, no matter how small. We're going to dig, and I promise you, we will find the truth." While Arthur was preparing for a war he never wanted, Julian Croft was celebrating a victory. He had just closed a massive deal for a new waterfront condominium project, a deal built on a mountain of leveraged debt. He stood in his corner office on the 34th floor of Croft Tower, gazing out at the city spread below him like a personal kingdom. He took a sip of his obscenely expensive scotch and dialed a number. "Arthur," he said, his voice oozing with false camaraderie. "Julian here. Just wanted to share some good news. We just broke ground on the new Celestial Point Tower. You'll probably see it in the papers." He didn't wait for a response. "It just got me thinking about you, stuck in that dusty old library. The mailroom offer still stands, you know. It's important to have a purpose." Arthur, holding the insurance letter in his hand, felt a cold clarity wash over him. The pity, the condescension, it was all a mask. Beneath it was a greed so profound it had waited a decade to feast. "Thank you for thinking of me, Julian," Arthur said, his voice eerily calm. "But I think I'm about to find a new purpose of my own." He hung up the phone, the conversation solidifying his resolve. This was no longer just about money. It was about justice for Eleanor. It was about honoring the woman they had so thoroughly underestimated. And, for the first time in 10 years, it was about fighting back. The next morning, Arthur sat in Marcus Thorne's minimalist office, a stark contrast to the opulent world of the Crofts. A single file folder lay on the polished desk between them. It contained the few financial documents he had been able to find, old bank statements, a copy of their mortgage, and the letter from Sterling Mutual. Marcus, a man whose sharp suit and sharper eyes radiated competence, reviewed the letter one more time. "The claim address is the key," Marcus said, tapping the paper. "They didn't even bother to hide it. That's arrogance. They truly believe you're powerless to question them." "What's our first step?" Arthur asked, feeling a strange mix of dread and determination. "We start with Eleanor," Marcus replied. "We need to understand her financial world, the one she kept separate from you. She was a Croft by birth. It's possible she had assets her family didn't know about, or assets they thought they controlled." Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense. "I have a forensic accounting team that can peel an onion layer by layer. We'll start with public records, property deeds, corporate filings. If Eleanor had a secret, we'll find its shadow." The investigation began. For weeks, Arthur lived a double life. By day, he was the quiet librarian, stamping books and helping patrons. By night, he was on the phone with Marcus, learning about the slow, meticulous process of uncovering a hidden life. The first break came from an unexpected place, a property tax record. "We found something," Marcus said over the phone one evening. "A small, unassuming LLC named Willow Creek Holdings. It owns a single property, a commercial building downtown." "I've never heard of it," Arthur said. "I know, but the registered agent for the LLC, the person who signed the incorporation documents 12 years ago, it was Eleanor." Arthur's breath caught in his throat. "It gets better," Marcus continued, a note of excitement in his voice. Willow Creek Holdings has only one tenant, a private wealth management firm called Argentum Capital Partners. They specialize in ultra-high net worth individuals and discrete asset protection. A private firm, a secret LLC. This was beyond a simple insurance policy. This was a deliberate, complex strategy. What does it mean? Arthur asked. It means your wife was not just managing your household budget, Marcus said grimly. She was building a fortress. Marcus drafted a formal letter to Argentum Capital, citing his legal representation of Arthur Vance, the surviving spouse of their founder's landlord. He requested a meeting to discuss the estate of Eleanor Vance. The reply was swift and surprising. They were granted a meeting. The journey to the Argentum office felt like a descent into another world. The building, owned by Eleanor's secret company, was an anonymous block of granite and tinted glass. There was no sign, no directory. They were met in the lobby by a severe-looking woman who led them to a conference room that felt more like a vault. The air was cool and still. A man in his late 60s entered the room. He had kind eyes, but a posture that suggested he was accustomed to carrying the weight of significant secrets. He introduced himself as Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Vance," Sterling began, his voice calm and measured, "I have been waiting for this meeting for 10 years. I was your wife's advisor, and I'd like to think her friend. She entrusted me with a great responsibility." He slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the table. Eleanor was a brilliant woman. She saw the rot in her family's empire long before anyone else did. She knew their greed was a bottomless pit. Arthur opened the portfolio. The first page was a summary of assets. He read the number at the bottom, and the room tilted on its axis. It wasn't a few $100,000. It wasn't even a few million. The number had 9 zeros, billions. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. He looked at Marcus, whose professional composure had cracked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How?" Arthur whispered. "How is this possible?" Mr. Sterling explained. Years ago, Eleanor had used a small inheritance from her grandmother, money the Crofts had dismissed as trivial, to make a seed investment. She had an eye for technology, for a future her family, with their obsession for brick and mortar, could never see. She invested in a small, obscure software startup. She did it through a series of shell corporations and under a pseudonym to keep her family from ever discovering it. That startup had exploded, becoming a global tech behemoth. Eleanor, the silent, anonymous partner, had become one of an incredibly wealthy woman. She knew what would happen if her mother and brother ever found out, Sterling continued. They would have torn it apart, used it to fuel their debts, and destroyed everything she had built. So she created a discretionary trust, a financial ark. The trust was designed to remain dormant for 10 years after her death. On the 10th anniversary, full control was to be transferred to its sole beneficiary, Arthur Vance. The life insurance policy was a tripwire, Sterling explained. She knew her brother was listed as the secondary beneficiary. She suspected he would be greedy enough to monitor it and claim it the moment he was able. Its claim was designed to trigger an early notification to my office, compelling me to contact you. Eleanor had planned for everything. She had anticipated their greed and used it as the very mechanism to reveal her secrets to the one person she trusted. Then came the final devastating revelation. "There is one more thing you need to know, Mr. Vance," Sterling said, his expression turning grave. "For the past 3 years, Croft Enterprises has been on the brink of collapse. They have been kept afloat by a series of emergency loans from a private lender. He pushed another document across the table. It was a loan agreement. The borrower was Croft Enterprises. The lender was an investment firm Arthur had never heard of, EV Holdings.
EV Holdings, Arthur said aloud. Eleanor Vance. Precisely, Sterling confirmed. It is a subsidiary of your trust. For the last 3 years, Beatrice and Julian Croft have been borrowing money from their sister's estate. They have been begging for a lifeline from the very man they have spent a decade scorning. The irony was so cruel, so absolute, it was almost poetic. They were utterly dependent on him. Their entire glittering empire, their social standing, their arrogant pride, it was all financed by the ghost of the woman they failed to appreciate and the widower they treated like a peasant. Arthur sat back in his chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He wasn't just a grieving librarian anymore. He was a billionaire. And he was his enemy's sole creditor. He looked at Marcus, then at Mr. Sterling. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by something cold and hard. It was the feeling of power. For 10 years, he had quietly endured their cruelty.
He had allowed them to define him as small, weak, and insignificant. He had honored Eleanor's memory with silent grief. But now he understood. The greatest way to honor her was to finish what she had started, to protect her legacy from the vultures in her own family. A decision formed in his mind, sharp and clear, like a shard of glass. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur said, his voice steady for the first time that day, "when is the next payment due on those loans?" Sterling consulted a file. "At the end of the month." Arthur looked at Marcus, a silent question passing between them. Marcus gave a slow, deliberate nod. The lawyer in him saw the legal checkmate. The friend in him saw the justice. "We're not extending the loan," Arthur announced. The words felt foreign in his own mouth, forged from a strength he didn't know he possessed. "We are calling it in, all of it." The decision point had been reached. The sleeping giant was awake. The days that followed were a whirlwind of strategy sessions. Arthur, Marcus, and Mr. Sterling's team worked from a secure conference room at the Argentum offices, a war room where the fate of the Croft Empire would be decided. Arthur learned more about Eleanor's brilliance with every document he signed. She had built an unassailable financial fortress. Now he was its king. "The plan must be surgical," Marcus insisted, pacing before a whiteboard covered in flowcharts. "We don't just want to cripple them, we want to dismantle their entire facade of respectability, using their own actions as the hammer." The plan was elegant in its brutality. It had 3 phases. Phase 1 was the loan recall. EV Holdings would send a formal, legally airtight notice to Croft Enterprises demanding immediate repayment of the full, outstanding principal. This would trigger covenants in their other loans, causing a domino effect with all their creditors. Phase 2 was the regulatory assault. Marcus's forensic accountants had uncovered a pattern of financial misrepresentation in Julian's public filings. He was inflating asset values to secure loans, the very loans Arthur now controlled. They would package this evidence and deliver it anonymously to the Financial Securities Commission. Phase 3 was the public execution. Beatrice was hosting her opulent annual Croft Foundation charity gala in 2 weeks. It was the crown jewel of her social calendar. It would be the perfect stage for the final act. "They will be financially ruined and legally compromised," Marcus summarized. "The gala will be their last stand, their desperate attempt to project strength. And that is where you, Arthur, will deliver the coup de grace." The thought of a public confrontation made Arthur's stomach churn. But the memory of a decade of small humiliations, the pitying looks, the charitable insults, the check on the mantelpiece, steeled his resolve. He signed the authorization letter. The first step was taken. The initiation was silent, A single email sent from an anonymous server, followed by a courier delivering a hard copy to Julian Croft's office. The first domino had been pushed. Now they just had to wait for it to fall. Julian Croft saw the email and laughed. "EV Holdings must be a typo," he said to his assistant. "Some clerk probably sent it to the wrong company. Ignore it." Then the courier arrived. The crisp, heavy paper and the stark, legal language of the letter could not be ignored. Disbelief was the first reaction. Julian read the letter 3 times, his confident smirk slowly melting from his face. This had to be a mistake, a hostile negotiation tactic. He tried to call the contact number for EV Holdings. It went to an automated, untraceable voicemail service. He emailed. He received no reply. Panic began to set in. He called his mother.
"Some ghost firm is trying to shake us down," he snarled into the phone. "They're calling in the emergency loans, all of them." Beatrice was incensed. "Who are they? Find out. Crush them. This is an insult. We are the Crofts." But there was no one to crush. EV Holdings was a phantom, its ownership hidden behind layers of international corporate law. Julian pulled every string he had, called in every favor. Every door was slammed in his face. Then the second domino fell. A notice arrived from the Securities Commission. An investigation had been launched into Croft Enterprises' accounting practices. All corporate accounts were frozen pending the review. The cascade effect was immediate and catastrophic. News of the investigation leaked to the press. The company's stock, already fragile, nosedived. It was a bloodbath. Other creditors, spooked by the loan recall and the investigation, started calling in their own debts.
The empire was crumbling, and it was happening with breathtaking speed. From his quiet library office, Arthur watched the news reports. He saw Julian, harried and furious, pushing through a throng of reporters, his usual smugness replaced with a deer-in-the-headlights terror. His phone rang. It was Julian. "Arthur!" he yelled, his voice ragged with desperation. "You won't believe what's happening. We're under attack. Some faceless corporation is trying to ruin us. It's a nightmare." Arthur took a slow breath, composing himself. He thought of Eleanor. He thought of her quiet strength. "That sounds terrible, Julian," he said, his voice a perfect facsimile of concerned sympathy. "Is there anything I can do?" The question, so earnest and so utterly ironic, seemed to break something in Julian. "Do!" he shrieked. "What could you possibly do? Just stay out of it. You wouldn't understand." He hung up. Arthur looked out the window, a profound sense of calm settling over him. Julian was right. He didn't just understand, he was the architect of it all. The man they had dismissed as a nobody was now the master of their fate. The Croft Foundation Charity Gala was supposed to be the social event of the year. Now it was awake. The grand ballroom of the city's most expensive hotel was filled with nervous whispers. The financial ruin of Croft Enterprises was the only topic of conversation. Beatrice and Julian moved through the crowd, their smiles stretched thin and brittle like cracks in a porcelain facade. They were desperately trying to project an image of calm and control, to reassure the city's elite that this was all just a temporary setback. But the fear in their eyes was unmistakable. The setting was perfect, a room full of the very people whose approval they had spent their lives cultivating. A stage built on a foundation of lies, about to collapse under the weight of the truth. Then Arthur arrived. He did not enter through the side door as he usually did for the few family events he was forced to attend. He walked through the main entrance. He was not wearing his usual ill-fitting suit of a humble librarian. He wore a bespoke tuxedo, tailored to perfection. It was a suit of armor. He had shed the skin of the grieving widower. Tonight, he was the vindicator. Heads turned. People who had never given him a second glance now stared, a murmur rippling through the room. He looked different. He looked powerful. He walked directly toward Beatrice and Julian. "Arthur," Beatrice said, her voice tight with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" "I came to make a donation," he said smoothly, "and to say a few words in Eleanor's memory." Before they could object, he was walking toward the stage, where the master of ceremonies was just finishing his remarks. Arthur stepped up to the microphone, and a hush fell over the room. "Good evening," he began, his voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the cavernous space. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Arthur Vance. I was Eleanor Croft's husband." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. "For 10 years, I have lived a quiet life. I have mourned my wife in private. But I've come to realize that the best way to honor a legacy is not to hide it away, but to ensure it stands for what is right." He looked directly at Beatrice and Julian, who were watching him with growing horror. Eleanor believed in integrity. She believed in honesty. She believed that a person's worth is not measured by the height of the buildings they construct, but by the strength of their character. He let that sink in. Let that sink. Her family, unfortunately, did not share those values. For 10 years they have treated me with pity and contempt. They saw me as nothing, a footnote in their grand story, a problem to be managed with a charitable check and a condescending job offer. A gasp went through the crowd. This was no longer a tribute, it was an indictment. "They spent a decade looking down on me," Arthur continued, his voice rising with a cold fire. "But what they didn't know was that Eleanor saw everything. She saw their greed. She saw the rot at the core of their business, and she took steps to protect her true legacy." He leaned closer to the microphone. "You see, the anonymous investment firm that is currently dismantling Croft Enterprises, the firm you've been desperately trying to identify, is called EV Holdings." He let the initials hang in the air for a moment. "Eleanor Vance Holdings." The room erupted in a storm of shocked murmurs. Julian's face went white as a sheet. Beatrice looked as if she had been struck by lightning. "It was her company," Arthur declared, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "And now it is my company. The debt you owe it to me. The power you thought you had, it was an illusion, financed by the woman you underestimated and the man you despised." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. He pressed a button. Eleanor's voice, clear and loving, filled the silent ballroom. It was a message she had left for him, stored in the Trust's digital vault. "My dearest Arthur," her voice said, a ghost at the feast. "If you are hearing this, it means my worst fears have come true. My family's greed has finally been laid bare. I built this financial fortress to protect what is ours and to give you the power to defend yourself. Use it wisely. Live a good life. Know that I loved you, always." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of shock and humiliation. Beatrice broke. A terrible, guttural scream tore from her throat. "Liar!" she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. "You're a thief! You stole it from us!" Julian, his face a mask of primal fury, lunged for the stage. "I'll kill you!" he roared. He never made it. 2 large men in dark suits, security that Marcus had hired, intercepted him, restraining him with practiced ease. The breakdown was complete. It was ugly, public, and undeniable. In front of the entire world they had fought so hard to impress, the Crofts had been exposed as frauds, bullies, and fools. As Julian struggled and Beatrice sobbed, the main doors of the ballroom swung open. 2 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes detectives walked in, their expressions grim and professional. They had been waiting outside, acting on the evidence Marcus had provided. They walked directly to the stage where Julian was still being held. "Julian Croft," one of the detectives said, his voice calm but authoritative. "You are under arrest for securities fraud and embezzlement." The final act was delivered not by Arthur, but by the cold, impartial hand of the law. As they cuffed a stunned and defeated Julian, Beatrice collapsed to the floor, her reign as the city's social queen ending in a pathetic, weeping heap. Arthur looked at the wreckage of their lives. He felt no triumph, no joy, only a profound, weary sense of justice. He had not sought revenge. He had merely held up a mirror, and they had been destroyed by their own reflection. He stepped down from the stage, turned his back on the chaos, and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the world of the Crofts to burn behind him. The epilogue of the Croft dynasty was written in the stark, unforgiving ink of legal proceedings and bankruptcy filings. Croft Enterprises was liquidated, its assets sold off piece by piece to satisfy the mountain of debt Arthur now controlled. The gleaming Croft Tower was stripped of its name, becoming just another anonymous building in the city skyline. Julian Croft, facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, was convicted. His sentence was long, a decade in a federal prison, a world away from the corner offices and exclusive clubs he once inhabited. Beatrice lost everything. The mansion, the cars, the art collection, all were sold. She became a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at the very charity events she once ruled. She was forced to move into a small, rented apartment, her days filled with a bitter, impotent rage. The world she had built on a foundation of status had vanished, leaving her with nothing. Arthur, however, did not step into the vacuum they had left. He had no interest in their world of galas and glass towers. He used his newfound wealth not as a weapon or a trophy, but as a tool. He established the Eleanor Vance Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to funding education for underprivileged students and providing seed capital for young entrepreneurs who, like Eleanor, had brilliant ideas but lacked the family connections to realize them. He did not move into a palace. He stayed in his modest home, the one Beatrice had called a mausoleum. He fixed the roof himself. He kept the worn armchair. It was his home, filled with the memory of a love that was real and true. One afternoon, at a gallery sponsoring a scholarship through his foundation, he met a woman named Sarah. She was the museum's curator, a kind, intelligent woman with a warm smile and a passion for history that matched his own. They talked for hours, not about money or status, but about art, books, and the quiet joys of a simple life. For the first time in over a decade, Arthur felt the stirring of a new beginning. Their relationship grew slowly, organically, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. Months later, Arthur and Sarah were walking through a park, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet. He was telling her about Eleanor, not the secret billionaire, but the woman he had loved, the woman who loved books and laughed at his terrible jokes. He felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. He was no longer defined by his grief, nor by the cruelty of the Crofts. He was defined by his own choices, by the good he was putting into the world. He had won. But his victory was not in the billions he had inherited or the enemies he had vanquished. It was in this quiet moment, walking hand in hand with someone who saw him for who he truly was. True wealth, he had come to understand, isn't measured in dollars or social status, but in integrity and the love we leave behind. Some people spend their lives building empires of glass, forgetting that the truth, like a stone, can shatter it all with a single, well-aimed throw. Eleanor had thrown the stone, and he had simply been there to watch it land.